Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, my guest today rebuilt her entire business from a sickbed, and what she built rivals some of the most well-known psychological and behavioural profiling tools in the form of its sophistication and actually the depth of understanding about that. Maeve Ferguson is the authority architect. She's a strategist who takes unstructured genius locked inside a thought leader's head and turns it into diagnostic infrastructure that qualifies, converts, and scales. And it does that without them in the room. She calls it the journey from respected but replaceable to a category of one, which clearly has to be a conversation that we have to have during the course of this episode. So drawing on Big Four accounting at Ernst Young and private equity experience, she brings forensic precision into a completely different world and applies it. And the result is a methodology so rare, she's the only person doing it at this level. Still running her global practice from a working horse farm in Northern Ireland while raising two young children. So Maeve, welcome to the Wisdom of the Show. It's a thrill to have you here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be a deep discussion that most business leaders might be surprised by.
Thank you so much, Simon. I cannot tell you how excited I am for this conversation. I think we're going to be really able to dig into the sophistication of IP and what is possible.
I think so. And, you know, I want to, the starting point for me is this, you were working horse farm in Northern Ireland while raising two young children, running a global business around data sophistication. I've never said all those things in the one sentence before. So, was this a deliberate thing you actually built or it evolved? Let's just kind of set the scene for people out of the back of, illness that actually caused you this. I'd love to just get the backstory for a moment so people know a bit about you, and then we'll get into the thinking around what you do.
Yes, absolutely. So I think I've got the most random journey to doing what I do now, working with data and all of those things. But the Cliff Notes version is that I did my undergraduate degree in equine science. So I used to be an amateur steeplechase jockey. And I actually spent some time during that degree over in Australia, New Zealand as a track rider, working at Flemington and the Gold Coast and in Matamata in New Zealand. So that was a very kind of early 20s chapter of my life. And, was pretty intelligent going through that, qualified top of my year, and kind of realized I probably should get a proper career, proper job. Bless my parents, I don't know how they let me go down that avenue in the first place, but they were brave enough to let me go and do what I wanted to do. And then I moved in, did a master's in management and corporate governance, and that was the end of my writing career because I got really badly smashed up in a race when I was in my mid-20s. And anyhow, that all went by, moved in then, qualified from my master's, went into Ernst Young. For my sins, I loved Ernst Young, but I worked in process and control for many, many years in the financial services industry. And I'm the type of person, I love everything I do. So I loved it at the time, but I look back now and kind of half chuckle that how did I enjoy that so much? And also it gave me a really, really good grounding. First of all, into how proper companies are run. Secondly, into sheer professionalism. And, that was my first job. So I just assumed all businesses were run like that. And now that I work in this online world, you can very rapidly see that is not actually the case. So I did that for a number of years, worked in London in financial services. And then I got an opportunity. I was still seeing my partner, my now husband. He was a horse trainer back in Ireland. So I was going over and back from London every single week for years. And then a big opportunity came up in private equity in Northern Ireland. So I bailed out of London, came back to my country life. And now I live in a horse farm. And I actually left private equity. I got very, very sick in my early 30s with a virus and spent about 4 years, going between bed and the sofa in a wheelchair, just a horrendous chapter of life, but recovered from all of that, left corporate and then set up my business. And I've been doing that now for over 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So, there was science in your background from the start, actually, in terms of equine science. So your brain is scientific and mathematical potentially
Yeah,
by nature. And
yeah, true.
so there's that interest in what does data tell us, and
Hmm.
what's the method behind. And what we're trying to do with the wisdom of is have people understand the deeper level of what goes on as people go through their journey and things like that. It'd be remiss of me to just rush past the virus. 4 years kind of between the
Hmm.
sofa and the bed. And I
Yeah.
suspect you formed some philosophical views about things, and you'd had this experience in the world of work. You'd seen professionalism. You'd
Mhm.
experienced, a couple of ranges of different work and knew what you did and didn't like. You'd had, trying to be a jockey and lived in the equine world. What did that setback? What did that 4 year setback equip you with that
Mhm.
maybe is still serving you today that you wouldn't have
Yeah.
expected otherwise?
Yeah, beautiful question. So for me, it's like hands down the best thing that ever happened to me because I'm a massive overworker, overachiever, winning, winning, winning everything. And it literally put me flat on my back. So, there was times I couldn't, no light, no sound, lying flat in bed in a darkened room. And it does
Mm.
something to your soul, is how I would describe it. It just changes you so completely that it's so like the first couple of years, I just assumed I was going to get better like next week. And then as time went on and on and on, it really changes you at a soul level. So for me, it is the appreciation of being able to lift the weight of a cup of tea. And
Yeah.
here I am now, like jet setting all over the world. I'm traveling every 6 weeks or so. I just have two children, like things like I just never thought in that chapter were ever going to actually be possible again. So it just changed me so much at a soul level that I just now kind of like suck the life out of every single moment of life that I get access to and I'm able to. And that appreciation, like I couldn't read, I couldn't process anything. I could hardly follow a Netflix program. My brain was just completely like gone. And it was really hard because I used to win like long distance running races. I was a marathon runner. I trained 6 days a week. My career was flying. I managed a team of 47 people in private equity. So it was very, very, it put manners on me. So it really just made me realize like all of us are just a human being and we work so hard and we put so much meaning attached to our careers and our work. And then literally overnight, it can just all vanish. So I think that appreciation is probably the biggest takeaway for me, that every single thing we get to do as a well human being is just a privilege to literally be alive and be well.
Yeah. What a fantastic perspective to acquire, relatively early. And, which also means every single day is an opportunity to make some kind of a contribution.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be big. It just can be what you have that day to actually give, I grew up in the country, Western Australia, and really small towns, 900 people and things like that. And I'm a massive animal lover. Our whole family is. But we particularly like dogs,
Mhm.
and one of the things about dogs is that if they're not asleep, they are 100% present. Like it's just like, how can
Mhm.
I pull you into the fun that I would like to have right now?
Mhm.
If I can drag you away from whatever you're doing, and they're just all they've got is the moment, right? They're just 100% present. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but we could all do a lot more with just being grateful for what is right in front of you. And then also thinking about, well, what am I going to do with this now? I've come out the other side and I'm well. So
Mhm.
what am I going to do with this now? I need to do something with it. So it took you into this space that you're in right now. And one of the things you talk about is, respected but replaceable.
Mhm.
And we'll come to the data in a minute, but this kind of problem that sits underneath what you're experiencing with founders and leaders and business owners around the world as you work with them, this respected but replaceable rather than being the one authority in the marketplace. Just speak to the problem that you see
Yeah.
with business leaders around the world.
Yeah, so what I see and what I observe is that even with the people who are at the absolute top end of their game, they've already made it, they're already the household name, is that when they stop, it stops. So if they die or if they retire, it's like the next generation won't even remember their name. And if we think of some of the things that keep on keeping on, generation after generation, what is it that they actually did differently to the current, whoever the hotshot is in the internet right now, that's going to 40 years from now, our kids, our kids' will not even know their name. And I think that is the biggest thing, is that they are respected right now, but they are so totally replaceable by the next hotshot because they don't have the infrastructure in place in their companies to have their IP outlive them, to outlast them.
So let's help people self-identify a little bit.
Okay.
What's that moment, and what are you seeing when you recognize that that's actually the person standing in front of you? They've probably, if you're like me, because we have a similar perspective. We're trying to help people codify the core genius of the company, right? So it's not just in the founder's head. And there's certain things that we look for, but what is it that you see in the moment that allows you to recognize that person's in front of me? They're respected but replaceable. And, in 40 years' time, no one will remember them, as opposed to they created this IP that now has a life of its own. What do you see? Let's help people self-identify.
Yeah, so I think what I would do here is speak to the symptoms. And so I work with a lot of keynote speakers because assessments are amazing off the back of the stage. But when you think about a keynote speaker, there are literally only so many days in the year. And even if they're charging 250K a keynote, there's still a finite amount of time. So they get to the stage that either they are pedaling and pedaling and pedaling, they're doing keynote after keynote, they're on that whole circuit, and they still realize that when they stop, it stops. And a lot of them, they start to face down like the barrel of a gun, where they are realizing there's only so many of these things I can do, and I can't have any more impact beyond those that are in the current audience because they don't have that infrastructure in place. So that would be the kind of one symptom, is for the keynote speaker that just sees the ceiling that is sitting there in front of them, no matter how much they get paid per keynote. And then the second piece would be for, the New York Times #1 best-selling author. They have, anybody who has like done that type of book launch, who has hits, all of the big bestseller lists, knows the colossal amount of work that goes into getting to that stage. And like everything in business, it's like, yay, we hit it. But now you're at day zero, and it's like it's a fanfare for a couple of weeks, and then they realize they have to keep pedaling and pedaling and pedaling, either for the next book or keep pedaling to keep that one going, to keep their IP even respected and like top of mind right now, even for a window of weeks. Never mind talking about decades and decades and decades into the future.
It's interesting. I find myself saying to people all the time that a company today needs to be an AI-equipped research company. We are all in the business of research today but people don't want to buy the stuff that they could actually ask Claude about. Like, what have you got that I perhaps can't get to? There is a deeper perspective. Everyone has a lens of perspective, but if you can back that up with data, that's a whole other ball game. We'll get to the Tetris Brain in a bit. You said they don't have any infrastructure. And it's an interesting word. You're not talking about bridges and things like that. You're talking about, I guess, IP infrastructure. Do you want to unpack your use of the word infrastructure a little bit in the context of what we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. So I think what happens, if you look at the 1994 PDF lead magnet funnel, which everybody, had back in the day, essentially at best, what a thought leader is learning about their audience is their name, their email address, and maybe at a push a phone number for a PDF lead magnet that nobody ever opened or read or did anything with. And my whole view of this infrastructure piece is through the lens of what we call assessments. So whether you want to call them quiz funnel, score-based assessment, multidimensional assessment, essentially it's a marketing and sales mechanism that allows us to ask our audience a series of questions that either gives them an archetype or it acts as a gap analysis tool to tell people where they are against where they want to be. And essentially, so what that actually does is this infrastructure allows us to gather hundreds and hundreds of data points against every single lead. And then over time, what that allows us to do is to analyze the patterns of behavior, the purchasing behavior of different leads. And that was kind of like the 101 version before AI came out. But now we're able to do these things completely dynamically. Everything is custom. We've got AI agents that are able to analyze, which Facebook ad they clicked on, which piece of copy that resonated with them, how they answered every single question going through an assessment, whether they went on to buy our multi-six-figure thing or our 10K thing or anything in between. And those patterns of behavior and all of those data points that are being captured with every single lead is literal gold in terms of, marketing, feeding back to the top of marketing, your top of funnel, feeding back to the sales team. It is really useful data inside of the company from a marketing and sales perspective. And then there's the whole other piece that I know we'll get to later, where that is actually a monetizable asset that is in every single thought leader's business.
What would you say to the people that are just glazing over with the word data? Because some do.
So what I would say there is that, there's three main forces have converged recently. Okay, so the first being that the knowledge economy has collapsed. Okay, and anybody who's been in this digital marketing space that we've all been in for years, where we used to be able to sell our digital courses and sell our knowledge, will have felt in recent times that the purchasing behavior has changed because knowledge no longer has value. Very, very sad, but it's actually a fact. All of our IP is already in the machines. Okay, so we can cry about that or we can realize that that's a fact. So that knowledge economy collapsed. Then what everybody did was they ran to AI, and I call it the AI savior trap, because what everybody did was build their IP into, custom GPTs, and they started flogging it for, pennies on the dollar. And then they realized this isn't actually going to solve for that, the knowledge economy collapsing. And then at the same time, we have this event happening, and it's a right now thing where I call it the data demand curve, where the all publicly available information has already been consumed by the models. It's already been all gobbled up. There is a huge demand for proprietary first-party behavioral data by marketing companies, by the AI companies themselves. And the supply is very, very low because A, people don't even know that this is a thing. B, they don't realize that it's an asset that they can monetize inside their business. So basic supply and demand, back to economics, people are paying a lot of money to get access to this data. So even if you're not a geek like me and you're not interested in the data itself, think of it as an income stream that's hiding inside of your business that you might not even know is sitting there right now. And hopefully that'll prick people's ears up enough to actually care about the data.
Let's play a little game and see if we can actually build a model about this whole idea of data. I mean, it sits underneath so much of what you do. What is data, right? And if I was going to start to communicate to somebody through a visual model, the importance of data to help them no longer be replaceable, but actually be memorable. Their IP now has a life inside an infrastructure and inside, IP assets and things like that. Just kind of give me the scene setting and I'll find the geometry and we'll build a model. So What does that actually mean?
So when somebody is, if we're turning the IP into this infrastructure piece, what we want to do is start with what's their framework, what is their model, okay? And then essentially what we want to do from there is really decide which version of the infrastructure is the best play for this particular client. So there's three main types. Super simple quiz funnel that probably everybody in the audience has heard of before, lead qualifier, writing machine, etc. So then we have at the far end of the spectrum, multidimensional diagnostic, which is the Enneagrams, the Myers-Briggs, the Dr. Arthur Brooks's happiness scale, for example. And then that is in the middle two options. Then we have the score-based assessment, which works really well for coaches, consultants, experts who have pillars to their framework, where we can score their leads, and then they essentially it acts as a gap analysis tool.
So if we were talking about levels,
Yeah.
and if this was a value hierarchy, and we were talking about levels, through the middle, you're really talking about mechanisms through the middle, if you like. So the various types of data that you could gather, the various tools that you could use to gather that data and things like that. I guess you could build, for want of a better word, in old-fashioned language, funnels that bring people to you through these mechanisms. Is that, on the revenue generation side, is it the mechanisms that actually create the interest that pull people to you?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, to me, it's like the quiz funnel or assessment or multidimensional assessment is a marketing machine that turns audience into qualified leads, routes them to the right offer, and converts them into clients. So the leads and clients are a given through that infrastructure.
Great. So if one side is revenue generation with this underlying value hierarchy driven by data, and interestingly, it's a movement away from the knowledge economy. We used to have a value hierarchy driven by knowledge.
Yeah.
We're now saying a value hierarchy driven by data, right?
Yep.
And the old funnels used to be lead magnets and things like that. Now they are these data mechanisms, if you like, that sit through the middle. If one side is revenue generation, what is the other side? What's the other dimension that data represents for a company that is leverage for them?
Yeah, so the data does a couple of different things. I used to come at this through the lens only of marketing and sales. So I mentioned, the AI agents that are analyzing the patterns of behavior, what people are buying and why, and then they inform the marketing team. Top of funnel, here's what to do more of, here's what to do less of. Here's the types of people that are buying our high ticket stuff versus the unqualified people that are coming through, and very much through that sales and marketing lens. But when then we actually zoom it up to the overarching view of that is just one department, but this data, this behavioral psychographic data, is actually an asset in its own right. It's not just a means to make, have better marketing and make more sales. It's actually an asset in its own right.
Yeah, so it generates asset value in the business. Are you saying an asset that increases the exit value of the business?
Yeah, 100%. So if you think about this asset that we are building for people who have the right infrastructure in place and all of the terms and all of those things, this is compounding value. So it's not like the data today is valueless and tomorrow's got a value and the next day. It compounds over time. So the more and more and more data that we have off the back of these assessments, the more value that has. And then what happens at an even more sophisticated level is we start to have our own proprietary first-party data, but then we start to layer that and aggregate that with other sources of data, which gives it even more flavor, even more depth, where we're there able to start to cross-compare against industries or layer in purchasing behavior data, etc. So this is compounding, and as we aggregate it with other sources, it just becomes what I would call it is like the last moat we have left standing in this age of AI. It's an asset that compounds over time.
Yeah, interesting. I'll get to the bottom in a minute. You've given me some interesting thoughts. If these mechanisms that you can build into an infrastructure to get assessments of prospective clients and things in the market, and these mechanisms themselves become assets, what do they drive at the top of this hierarchy? So what is the visible part, if you like, of the hierarchy that most people might realize immediately? You go, what if we built some infrastructure that captures data? Most people go, I get that. It will do this for me. What would be at the top of that hierarchy?
Yeah, so I think probably two things. It would be the sales that are able to come into the company without the
Yeah,
founder being on,
yeah.
because the infrastructure is there, it converts it to machine. And then secondly, it allows them to have impact beyond their life. Because again, because it's infrastructure, the IP is built into the infrastructure, and through certifications and licensing models and all of those types of things, that is what allows them people to, always have this legacy that they leave behind them when they're gone from this earth.
So let's get to the base, right? And the
Mhm.
base is the data. The base is this bigger game that you're playing, down the bottom. So let's give that some color. So,
Mhm.
one, you talked about proprietary first party data.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so that is every single, if you think of, in your mind's eye, think about somebody going through Myers-Briggs. We're
Yeah.
answering a battery of about 40 questions, and every single button we push on our phone or on our screen is pushing a data point to a database at the back end that says this person of this age and this gender and this location feels this about these things. And what that does is it generates that data that no other competitor actually has about their people, because they're
Mhm.
still swirling around, swimming around with PDF lead magnets, barely even knowing, the phone number of their potential prospect. We are able to gather these proprietary first party data points and use that internally in the company, but also, as I've already talked about, then that compounding asset on the back end. But it's the data points on the people in our market, our audience, that no competitor actually has, because they don't have the assessment.
Okay. And do you do it? Does the infrastructure do any work in terms of, obviously data is only useful with the analysis, right? So
So
there's obviously a science required in the analysis of this.
yeah, so the data in its own right still has value,
Yeah.
just as a raw data set. It becomes infinitely more valuable whenever we layer analysis on top of that. Okay, so it has value both ways, but it's whenever it's analyzed, it becomes even more valuable. But also just even internally from a marketing and sales perspective, the data never lies, and I think that's what I love about it. There's so many people run their businesses on feeling and emotion and all of these things, and like that's cool, but the data never lies. So
Yeah.
I'm big into making data driven decisions, not based on what mood I'm in that day. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we have that insight sitting there in front of us, and because it is geeky, and to your point earlier, with people's eyes glazing over, you for a lot of people, this isn't the fun side of business, but every single thing that is a blockage in your company right now, the data will tell you how to solve for that.
Yeah. So, would it be okay if I tried to explain everything you just said through the model?
Okay.
Would that be okay? We'll see how it'll go. The model didn't exist 5 minutes ago, so we're going to see how this lays out. And I don't have your expertise. We're just going to see what happens, right? If that's okay. So many founders, business leaders, original thinkers in a marketplace, and they've learned a value hierarchy that's driven by knowledge. That's how they went to market. They built knowledge and they sold knowledge. And the knowledge economy's collapsed. And so we need a different kind of value hierarchy inside companies these days. And the value hierarchy that makes the greatest sense is a value hierarchy driven by data, because data, everyone understands, has value. But what most people don't understand is the layers of data and how that plays out. What we tend to see in the marketplace is that founders, people that have originated something pretty clever, have, the knowledge driven value hierarchy required a lot on visibility. You're the keynote speaker, you were standing in front of an audience, you were there at the coalface delivering this thing, and as long as you were there, you could make sales and you could have impact in the marketplace. AI, the collapse of the knowledge economy, has removed visibility as your greatest point of leverage, and something else has to replace it. And the reality is, everything below that line is not something that businesses have been structured around in the past traditionally. And, so we're still trying to achieve the two things that most people want to achieve, which is cash, driving increasing, revenue, generating revenue, and driving capital value, asset value of the company. I want to exit this thing one day. So how do we do that if visibility is no longer the game we can play? Well, people have understood funnels for years as a way to go to market, but funnels are so 1990, right? Lead magnets and things like that. The truth is, it's no longer about funnels, it's about infrastructure. And infrastructure needs to equip a business with the mechanics of data-driven assessment to personalize and understand each and every prospect separately so they feel truly seen as an individual. And we have the capacity to do that today. There is no longer an excuse for putting generalized data in front of a single person when you can put personalized data in front of a single person almost immediately in response to a series of questions they've answered. And so the middle of this is no longer about funnels, it's about the infrastructure you build around it. And people think that this is an infrastructure play, but actually infrastructure is just masking the base of the of the hierarchy, and the base is where all the asset value accrues. At the base, when you have great infrastructure in terms of the mechanics, you gather so much data, so many data points on each and every prospect that you form this massive base of proprietary first-party data. So what you actually become is the source of data for the industry, and that has value. People want to buy the companies that are the source of data because, we've had, the demand curve has been occurring. All human information is being consumed by the models already. You need to be the source of new data that people want to buy. Data has value. And what that's providing immediately is intel that can actually help drive the top of the hierarchy for you. But data is only useful if you have analytical insight across the data and you're able to use the data then to drive that intel, but also it creates this compounding effect. So the data has value, and then the data has value at 2x and 3x and 4x if the analytical insight is powerful. And so this process of turning IP into data isn't just about creating some tools in the middle or figuring out how you say what you do at a knowledge economy level, but in fact turn it to data that drives industry. And so the whole process of what we're trying to do here is sort of almost making the argument you've got this hidden source of data inside your business and ability to build more of it, and most people are sitting on a data gold mine and don't even realize it. The whole agenda is to get to the bottom of the hierarchy and shift from value based on knowledge to value based on data and have it come out of the top. As you hear that back, A, did I understand what you said? Because I never know until I actually walk back through the model. And B, does it actually make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Hit the nail on the head. 100%.
Perfect. Well, my gift to you is the model. You can take this away and use it as much as you like. I'm going to get out of my own play zone at the moment, and I want to come back to. I want us to dive back into, I guess more provocation for business leaders and owners. So, you talk about the Tetris Brain, and I'm guessing that's a little bit how this process is, or it's you're doing this and no one else is really doing it. I mean, how can that be with the world we live in? What are people missing that really means this isn't something that people have been doing, and you've Tetris brained at this and put all the little blocks together? When you speak about it, it feels so obvious, yet it's not being done. So what are business leaders and founders actually missing that's got them distracted from this?
Yeah, I think, well, my personal opinion of this is I think the world has lost a decade to the bro marketer. So, and myself included, all went down for, a number of years down the hacks and tricks and, all of that, make $1 million by Friday, just push this button and by Friday you'll be a millionaire. It doesn't work like that. It's not, and this the shiny object syndrome. And I think the industry actually gobbled up a lot of good people they probably should never have been entrepreneurs. They probably should never have, gone down this route. And I think they're because kind of in the mid 2000s and things like that, this was all relatively new. It was so much easier back then, but now it's actually much, much harder to stand out. And I think is like what you do and what I do is very similar, but from two different angles.
Mhm.
You literally just heard me talk there for 15 minutes and articulated that in a way that I never could have because your brain is hearing the words and turning it into a model. My brain hears the same framework, and my brain is like turning it into infrastructure and systems and process and automation and questions and logic and scoring logic and all of those types of things. And I think to tie it back to the bro marketer piece, I think it's a lot of business owners, even the highest end people, had they just whack up a funnel and that's all we need to be successful. And our markets are more sophisticated now. They can smell a rat at 1,000 paces. They know what's actually happening now, whereas, a decade ago, the market wasn't as sophisticated. And with AI, there are so many people now that can actually make themselves appear better than what they actually are, smarter than what they actually are, but there's no depth or sophistication to their IP. And I think this is like a real opportune moment for people who have the real IP, not some framework they whacked up on ChatGPT last week, but real IP to completely separate themselves from the rest of the market, separate themselves from the competition by A, having those models, and then B, having the infrastructure that allows them to turn their frameworks into qualified leads, into the routing engine to get the right offer and the right message in front of the right person at the right time, and all the whilst gathering the data on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you in terms of, we all need to market, and marketing is a skill. Marketing has also commoditized everything it touches, and, quiz funnels had their fashion. Now people would look at an assessment tool and go, oh, you mean a quiz funnel? And you're talking about something completely different to that, right? Because you're talking about the bottom of the hierarchy. The tools are the mechanisms in the middle, but it's actually about what you do at the base to compound the results of it, turn the intel into something meaningful, and add real intellectual property value to the business. And I want to get onto something you said. In the AI-driven world, people would say, "Well, I can pop up a quiz in 5 minutes using chat." I want to come to that in a minute, but you also said something else that. What people may not realize is my first working life was in electrics and electronics.
Yeah, I saw
And
that.
so I'm a little bit geeky like you, right?
Yeah.
And you used the word logic then. And the word logic to me has always meant process control logic. So and or if logic, which you need to. And I'd love you just to, we throw the word logic around a lot, but I'd love you to speak to logic through your lens just for a moment, because I think you're talking about it at a deeper level than most people might actually understand. I'd love to get your take on logic.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, so logic for me is that everything has patterns, and consumers will always have patterns of behavior. But when we don't have logic built into infrastructure, we're left guessing. We have absolutely no idea where somebody is, what level they're at, how close they are in the buyer journey to jumping into your thing, or whether they're a million miles away. People simply don't know. And in this online space, for example, that people just keep pedaling and pedaling and launching and launching and launching and launching, and they have to keep doing that because they don't actually know where the next dollar is coming from into the company. When we actually build logic into and embedded in the infrastructure, what that allows us to do is know exactly where people are in their journey, exactly how close they are to converting, and therefore we can, sales pipeline management and all of those things just become a normal order of business, not spray and pray or hit and hope. Okay, so
Yeah.
for me, what we do then, if you think of the infrastructure that's behind these assessments, yes, we're asking loads of questions to understand somebody's archetype or where they are on the journey, but we also have both types of questions that are hidden questions that the taker never sees, that's able to scrape information about them and all of this in terms of their profile. But also, we're able to ask them questions that allow us to see where they are in their journey so that we're able to route them to the right offer. And what we don't want to do is like our multi six figure clients, they don't want our 10K thing. Our 10K people cannot do our multi six figure thing. And what we want to do, or your $47 course or whatever it may be, what we want to make sure is that we're building the logic into the infrastructure that it allows people to, if you think of almost like using electricity or electrics, if you think of it like a, what do you call that board they used to have? What do you call the board in electronics?
Motherboard? Motherboard?
Motherboard, right? So everybody is like siphoning off down a different route. They see different copy, they see different call to action. You're not letting somebody who has no money to invest get anywhere near your application funnel, for example. And so what ends up happening, compounding in the back end, is that the only people who get made the higher ticket offers are those who are A, ready to go, and B, have the funds to invest in themselves. So your conversion goes through the roof because the machine is siphoning off all the people who cannot afford to work with you to say, like, here's my YouTube channel, good luck, I wish you well, but my closers are not going to spend time talking to you when you don't have 10K to spend. Or so that
Yeah.
is like the routing machine, but it's logic that does that lead scoring, that every single button they push, it's firing off lead scoring in the back end. So as soon as somebody hits your CRM, you already know your lead score. AI agents are then flagging to the sales team to say, we call it the hot leads alert system, to say, here's a hot lead has just hit our pipeline. We aren't, trying to scavenge through, did anybody opt in this week? We have instant notification because the logic is built into the infrastructure.
It's such a logical thing. So,
Obvious. I'm like, why doesn't everybody do this?
I mean, at the base level, from an electronic perspective, when you understand how circuits work, it is as simple as if this and this occurs, do this. If this or this occurs, do this. And
100%.
that's actually pure logic at a digital level, right? And you can, a lot of great decision making would be made if people hunted for the patterns based on pure logic, if and or, and then how do we route this based on the response to that? So, I think that would open up a whole other conversation that would be worth talking about, just the logic, the logic of the customer journey. We talked about AI, and I think this, the future of data monetization here, because I see it all the time. I'm sure you do as well. Put together a course in 3 hours using ChatGPT and then go to the market with it. And it does my head in. There's nothing noble about that business. And if business is the most powerful force for good on the planet, every business should be noble in terms of what it does and how it conducts itself and how it sells. But, anyone can throw a course together in 3 hours on ChatGPT. That course has no value. If the investment that you're willing to make in this is 3 hours, then no one should pay you anything more than what your 3 hours might be worth at the lowest possible price point. So AI has kind of created the opportunity for people to throw stuff together. Yet it's also an incredibly powerful tool, I'm sure, in terms of what you're doing used well. Where do you see AI taking us in this data space? Like, data is a serious asset space. And what are you doing with AI at the moment?
AI is actually a brilliant thing. I think it's just going to spit out anybody who's mediocre, anybody who is spinning up absolute rubbish on AI and then trying to flog it. The market will spit them out. So I think that is handled, that's taken care of. What I care about is that those who actually have real IP, sophisticated IP, that they don't get, lost in the mincer of what AI has permanently changed in this world. So that's kind of that piece. And karma is also a thing. So I think that whole end of the industry will be handled. And then B, AI to me is I've gone down this rabbit hole. I've got an amazing mentor in this space called Sam Woods. He's been doing this for years and years and years when all of us, myself included, didn't even know what AI was. And I met him at a mastermind event of Ryan Levesque's in March 2025. And he said a few things, and I am a very agile person. I sat up, took notice, and realized that I too was going to get gobbled up in this industry if I didn't go down this
Yeah.
rabbit hole. And the reason being is that funnels will cease to exist. And here am I running an agency that builds, assessment funnels and quiz funnels and all of these things. So I went down that rabbit hole in a big, big way. Thankfully, I'm very technical. But we have like 92 AI agents running now inside of our company, doing everything from marketing, sales, finance reporting. I'm big into KPI dashboards and all of those things. And these agents allow us to really, back to the data point, they really allow us to use the data to inform better decision making. And what it is for me as the founder of my own company, what it's allowed me to do, and so for some of our clients as well, is that the founder dependency is reduced. So it used to take my ex Ernst Young brain and my accountancy background and all of those things to truly understand our metrics and our KPIs and make decisions that were going to take the business to the next level. Now I have this little army working for me day and night, informing me of the cliff note things that I need to be paying attention to, keeping a pulse of what's going on in my market so that I don't have to get sucked into the weeds of, every single imaginable thing that's going on in not only in my business but in the world. I refuse point blank to watch the news because I don't want to be, exposed to that like toxic information, but I also don't want to go to a VIP day and look like I have no idea what's going on. So I have agents that find out everything's going on in the world, serve me up on a plate every morning to tell me, here's what you need to know without me having to get sucked into that whole, negativity. That's one example.
Yeah.
Or, for example, every single call that gets booked in my calendar, we have agents that run, this call included, we have an agent that runs, pulls together a complete brief based on predetermined criteria on the person I'm out to meet and everything I need to know about them and different, points of commonality and things like that. So that every coffee chat that I have or every sales conversation I have or any podcast interview I'm on, I am fully briefed days in advance of who that person is so that you're not getting into overwhelm. And it's like everything. So that's, just one tiny agent that completely changes how you do business, how you shop, how organized you are. And to be totally honest, with like two very small children at home and a very busy horse farm, I need that organization and logic and structure and control so that my own brain doesn't melt.
There's no argument anymore for a business to ignore this and hope that it's going away. You will get left behind.
It's like this is not a fad or a passing thing. And it's the other thing is like you'll never, like we are doing some very advanced things and I still feel like I'm 1,000 years behind, where I should be. So it's just there is no reason to pause. You gotta get into it now, otherwise your competitors will literally gobble you up.
It is the most accessible form of leverage. Founders are always going on about, I want leverage, I want leverage. It is the most accessible form of leverage I've ever seen in my professional career. There's nothing else that's ever come along that can provide the leverage in this. On the other side of that, I think people are pretty aware of the risk of, cognitive dilution if you use it in the wrong way and so on. So what do you notice in your clients that they have that AI isn't going to be able to do that means that they do have IP worth turning into data and proprietary data at that? You've met a lot of people, you've worked with a lot of people. Are there any patterns that you see in someone that has something that is worth codifying into a long-lasting asset?
I think There's one piece is discernment. Okay, so anybody can whip up anything on Claude nowadays. Okay, but the discernment comes from and the ability to read between the lines, the ability to hear the unsaid, to see something that isn't actually written down, comes from the decades of experience of doing this. So, for example, if you look at what you just did with me with the model, you were, I was chatting and you were able to hear all of the unsaid things that I said to create that beautiful model. That is the type of thing that no AI model, unless you have programmed it literally with every thought inside your brain, is going to be able to spin up to the same caliber.
Mm.
Okay, so that's definitely one piece. And then there's the decades of experience piece. So when you have a body of work that is decades and decades long, and when you have that level of experience, people are paying for your insight, not the information, because the information is valueless. Okay, I
Yeah.
could go onto Claude and whip up a model that's based on Simon Bowen's methodology. I'm never going to see it and hear it in the way that you've just articulated to me. They have a real IP, they have the discernment piece, and they have the decades of experience in their zone of genius. That is then what allows that assessment to be codified on real IP to turn into a real data funnel to qualify leads, segment leads, route leads that isn't a quiz that somebody whacked up on Lovable last week.
The asset, those three things that you outlined, that shifts them from respected but forgettable or replaceable to this is a body of work now supported by proprietary data that like a Myers-Briggs or a DISC or something like that now is just part of the language of business, if you like. It's there's a body of work there, so it's fascinating. Maeve, I'd love to wrap us up now. You've been generous with your time, but I'd like to ask three quick questions, quick responses, so people know a bit more about Maeve. And I do have some that I use commonly, right? But I might even deviate a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. What is the most fascinating thing about being on a horse farm? What's the biggest lesson you've had from being on a horse farm?
Honest answer, toddlers and mud and rain in Ireland makes for very, very messy children. But I think, yeah, to answer your question properly, I think I have foaled hundreds of mares, and every single solitary of birth that I have, and we foal, 6 mares there in the last few weeks, and it's just mind-boggling when you see this thing that stands up within an hour. It is like massive, and the absolute awe of mares being able to foal, just nature is every single time, no matter how many times I go through it, you're like, how on earth is this possible?
Yeah, fantastic. And what is something that has it could be a failure or a success, a failure or a setback, or actually an unexpected success, something that taught you a lesson you weren't expecting to get until you realized you had it, you received it.
So I love this one, and it's be ready. So for me, I spent years and years and years in the trenches, building this business. Like when I started this business, I didn't even know what a funnel was, literally. So I did years and years of groundwork and did everything right so that when I got a referral to a big name from my mentor, and I was ready. So that was my biggest thing. It was like I didn't know it was coming, but I worked and I worked and I worked and I worked and I refined, and I basically got myself a PhD in what I do, so that the moment that unexpected thing came, I was ready, which meant then that was a complete catalyst for everything in my business. But it also wouldn't have worked had I not been ready.
Yeah, absolutely. And other than be ready, one of your children, at 18, 19 or 20 says, Mum, I'm going to go into business. And you have no clue what the business is actually about. It's whatever 18, 19, 20-year-olds are doing in business at that point.
Mhm.
But you've got a bunch of business wisdom, and you just want them to remember one thing the whole time. What would you share with them? Like, just never forget this.
Go where the market wants you to go.
That's a great place to end, actually. So just don't decide where the market's got to move to. Go where the market wants you to go. Fantastic. They'll probably both go into business, because children of entrepreneurs, you know,
Yeah. I
don't
think
don't get an
my
example.
son is currently goes to the market to sell his cattle at 5. So
Right.
yeah, he might get out of that type of business. Let's see.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for giving us so much time, being generous, and sharing the whole story actually, but also, data's cool, and
Yeah.
it's potentially the greatest asset a business is going to have in the next decade at least, but beyond. In reality, they become the source of industry data
Mhm.
and actually leverage that through analytical insights so that it compounds for them in the business. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And, let's stop building funnels. Let's start, building data infrastructure. All right. Thank
Yeah.
you, mate.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed the conversation.